Good evening, First Assembly. Thanks for coming back for another session of Parenting on Purpose. This is our 8th session, and in case you haven't been able to catch them all, or maybe you're wanting to go back or at least just wanting a review of where we've been so far, I'm going to pull up a slide here and in just a moment that kind of shows where we've been. Of course, again, our series is Parenting on Purpose, that the generations to come will know. As I said, this is our 8th session. We've had the first 3 sessions on the foundation of our calling, session 4 on heart training, and then the last few sessions, how do we help our kids to display love, respect, and kindness in this world in various domains. Again, this is session 8, and we're moving on to respect for property. And that's one of those things that you could immediately think, well, come on, we're talking about relationships. We're talking about displaying a love for God in this world and who God is. And we're not supposed to be materialistic people. But hear me out. A way to honor people many times is to honor their property, and there are reasons for that. Exodus 20:15 says, "Do not steal." Of course, this verse is considered to be about property. We immediately think of property. When you think of ancient times, whether Old Testament or New Testament, property was often animals. So that was really a person's main possession. But just let's kind of open that up to what else could be stolen. What else can you rob someone of? And I'm not reading into this passage. I just want us to think of that principle of taking from someone, and because it's a topic, it's a concept that we need to address with our kids. Again, because we can honor people through their property, but we can also honor people by not taking things from them that aren't ours. Here's a few examples. Stealing is really more than stuff. You can steal, of course, another's possessions. Again, that's what we think of right away with that commandment. What about taking advantage of a person's naivety? And this can happen in society with disadvantaged populations, populations with cognitive disabilities, or any type of disability, that someone could take advantage and to get what they want out of them. And of course, siblings do this to each other. My daughter is on top of this a lot with her children. One of my grandkids especially can really connive their way to try to get something away from another, and to really prey on their innocence and their naivety. And of course, she's young and as well, but you know what I mean, that taking from someone because you're talking them out of it, or you're tricking them out of it. Number 3, do not steal someone else's time. To be respectful of other people's time. I have often said, especially just really these past couple years, money is worth so much more. Time is worth so much more than money to me. Yes, money is important, and money is a concern with living each day and living throughout the year, and having enough for retirement and enough equity in our home and all those kinds of things. Yes, but I value time so much more than money. And again, it just felt like I've realized that the past couple of years. I could have realized it a lot sooner. But number 4, do not steal someone else's reputation. Whether that's whether it's been a slanderous thing or a gossip, we often think of those in making up things or saying untruthful things. But even if it's a truthful thing that harms someone's reputation, that didn't need to be talked about and didn't need to be said, and to talk with our kids about these kinds of things, especially with social media and the way people are criticized and shamed, and it's so easy for people to get on that bandwagon, and for our kids to be strong enough to wait, to not post what they might be feeling right now about a certain person, and to just be able to move on. There's a great book that I thought of just a few moments ago, and I thought, boy, I didn't really plan to mention it during this series, but it's called #Unoffendable. And it's one of the premise of the book is, as believers, should we really be offended? I mean, we know what's going to happen in this world. We know how believers will eventually be treated and so on, and that's not a woe is me kind of thing. But the fact that we have the strength of Christ living in us, and we have the promises of Scripture, and the notion of being offended, because people get so easily offended today, and the believer, really, we should be unoffendable. It's almost impossible to think that we would be, because there's so many things to be offended about nowadays. But it's easy to lash out in times where we get offended if someone's done something, and then you fire back, and that kind of goes along with number 4. Again, you don't want to damage their reputation. You don't want to say things that you have to apologize for later, and train our kids to do the same. See, the object of respect is not the property. That's why I said earlier that I think with that topic, immediately you might think, well, that's materialistic, of respecting property, big deal. But the object of respect is always and foremost the person who owns the property. This goes back to really how what we've been discussing all along. It's a sense of otherness. I am going to respect property because someone owns it. And not only does someone own it, but they probably worked really hard for it. And this property might represent lots of time, lots of money, lots of family history, lots of generations even. So respecting property is a way to honor others, even if I don't know who they are. And sometimes that even means not trespassing. So think of the notion of property and dominion. Property, that's tangible and physical within my ownership. I own property, own stuff. But dominion is that which I am responsible over, both physical and non-physical realms, both in. It includes property, time, space, personal rights. It's space. It's a spatial thing. As I may have mentioned before, in a number of circles, I've worked a lot with kids who have been through trauma or been through abuse and neglect, and sometimes one of the principles to teach kids is the boundaries. And what I just said, though, I spoke about a certain population, but really this applies to all kids and all people. The lesson that we've often used hula hoops to say, this is your personal space. You don't get to go into someone else's personal space without asking first, and they don't get to come into your personal space without asking. And so it's kind of that dominion. This is my space, and dominion is also that idea that someone would come into my space and change it, or do something, or steal something, or hurt something. And that's an important concept for kids to learn. And maybe you would even teach that to your kids, with the idea of a hula hoop as a good measure of personal space. But dominion is also seen when let's say one of your kids is carrying something and the other one reaches and just grabs it away from them. It's like a dominion sensor, that idea that, wait, you came into my space and grabbed out of my hands and you didn't even ask. And so respecting people in that way, and respecting the things that they own or the things that they hold. And then also with this is teaching children the value of property, because it's an opportunity for them to understand that work defines value of other things. That it's not just a thing. It's not just a window. It's not just a home. It's not just a toy, but that someone worked for it. And so therefore there's value placed on it. And so someone works, they get money and they buy something. So you respect what they bought. And so in this process, you're teaching your kids the value of work and money. Number two there, how free work is expected by each family member. That being in this family, there are certain things that we have to do. There are certain responsibilities. You use the word chores or responsibilities, however you do it, that there is a such thing as free work because you're part of the team. You're not getting paid for it. This is just what we do because you live here and we're a team together. So that's a good, interesting concept to teach kids during this as well. How to develop a personal work ethic and understanding of labor and value. Another great thing that comes up with respecting property, because when a child gets to work for something, as something that they really want, then they understand, fully, this idea if someone would come and steal it and break it, and how frustrated they would be because they worked for that. They worked for the money to buy that. And so we can instill in them at a young age the character trait of hard work, of having a strong work ethic. And I'm going to add something here, and this is my own opinion here, so a little disclaimer. I am not in favor of regular allowances for kids that are just because they're part of the family. I understand giving them money and having them be able to manage it. But think about this. There are certain things we do, certain responsibilities, because you're part of this family. And you don't get paid for those. If you want to save up, if there's something that you really want to buy, then I will give you an extra job. I will give you something outside the realm of regular chores where you could work for so much per hour or so much per project or whatever, and then you can buy that. Again, I'm not saying that's the biblical standard, but I see it as the kind of a better choice, because your kids understand early on that they're able to work for something, and the value of things, their own as well as other people's. And this translates later in life. I've talked about my kids as examples, but this is one that I'm very proud of. I'm proud of the way they got jobs as soon as they could and worked really hard. Our three oldest kids, Christina's not had a job yet, but also that when they turned 16 and they got a license, we said, we have this old vehicle that you can drive and you're welcome to it, but if you want something else, then you save for it. Well, that translated into some hard work and really nice cars. When our kids were 16, each of them bought their own vehicle, and pretty nice vehicles as well. But that really goes back to the notion that when they wanted something, they had to work for it. I remember the boys staining our entire back fence after power wash. That's the word. They power washed our long back fence and stained it, and they earned money to buy things. I think of times when they wanted to buy a video game or whatever, and they've received a project for that. And so when they were able to get formal jobs and work in a place and save up, like my son Jameson, he started working when he was 14, and he's very good about saving. So when he turned 16, and he bought himself a 1998 really nice red Corvette. He only had it for a while because he realized just the upkeep was so expensive. But it was a great thing for a 16-year-old who was able to buy a Corvette, because he has saved for all this time and worked so hard, and it was his. But this is Texas. He sold it and got a truck. All right. Number 4 there, to show love, respect, kindness to persons by respecting their property and its value. So when you borrow something, do you give it back as good as you had it, or better than you had it, or worse than it was? You know what I'm saying? there was a movement years ago where men would gather in stadiums, and they called it Promise Keepers, where there'd be a speaker and great music. And one of the things of Promise Keepers is, let's leave this stadium as good as when we found it. And so they would have trash bags, and guys would, instead of spitting things on the ground like sunflower seed shells or whatever, they would put everything in a bag at the end of the row, and all the guys are doing it. And so those kinds of idea that, do I leave things better than when I found them? Let's think of, again, I'm not talking about perfection, but think of being a believer in this world. Should I leave things better than when I found them? I should leave people's lives better than when I found them. I should speak into people's lives. I should look for needs. But even when it comes to property, and we're going to talk about nature in a moment, I think of a time when I borrowed a saw from a neighbor, and I told my boys, it's so nice of him to loan this to us, hey, let's go to the store and buy him a new blade, so that when we give it back, we're giving it back nicer than when we had it. We're borrowing someone's tent to go camping, making sure it's very clean and it's wrapped up very well, and it's aired out already, so they don't have to do all that kind of stuff. We had friends who once said to us, we know your vehicle's kind of old and you wanted to go on a family vacation to drive far, you could take our van. So what did we do? We made it a family project. When we got back, we said, okay, we're going to give this van back, and we're going to vacuum the inside well, we're going to fill it up with gas, we're going to wash it and wax it together as a family. And so it became a family thing too, that we're respecting their property as a way to say thank you, but also because they worked hard for it, they paid for it. And there was a time when my son David was in the church parking lot, and he was pretty young. I was probably 6 or 7 years old, and he knew better than to throw a baseball. Threw a baseball and hit a windshield in a Jeep, and it was a friend of ours, and she said, oh, don't worry about it, I have insurance, which is the classic thing that people will say, right? Or even the person who did it will say, oh, do you have insurance? But we wanted him to understand that this isn't, just insurance kind of wipes away responsibility sometimes, but we wanted him to understand more of responsibility. So there were certain things he had to do and work out around the house in order to at least pay part of it back. Now, he was very young again, and maybe so to some of you that sounds crazy that we would have a young child work off some things, but we at least did in a way that he understood that he's got to pay for this, because he made a poor choice of throwing a baseball in a parking lot full of cars. And all right, okay. This illustration has been used before in various kids parenting programs. There was one a long time ago called Growing Kids God's Way, and you recognize some of the things if you were familiar with some of the things that I've incorporated into this series, and the idea that as a believer, not wanting to make work for other people, I'm going to put my shopping cart back, because if I don't put it back, someone else has to come get it, and it can often take up a spot that should be for cars, or the wind can take it and it could scratch a car, or it's just a form of laziness to not go put it back. It's Walmart and Target and other places don't have to have them. They do that as a service to their customers. And so again, those everyday life, this is property. Is it Walmart's property? Yes, but it could damage someone else's property. Always considering, how am I respecting the property of people around? And this was a struggle being on a church staff, because there were certain things that I would take pride in, like building, or building like a children's ministry set, or doing something, or painting, and someone would come along and play with it and break it and trash it, and it's like, it wasn't my property, but it's still kind of in my dominion. This is common in some churches when it comes to the church kitchen. People will go in and serve themselves hot chocolate and all these things and just leave it a total mess. Like, let's respect the property by respecting others, because you've just made work for other people that you didn't have to make, because you could have cleaned up after yourself. That is a virtue that is often missing today, but I believe our kids can internalize it and live it out. Respect for nature. again, you might be thinking, well, come on, what is this? Are we gonna, are we gonna talk about some loving nature kinds of stuff, or I don't know, but I recognize that this might not fit into the others thing, but it really does. And why do we respect nature? First of all, we should treat nature in the way that we take what we need, but we give back too, so that each generation will have the beauty to enjoy. And I think sometimes in Christian circles, or maybe let's say religious circles, people are looked at funny because the idea that this is our temporary home, maybe we've not been the best stewards at time. We're not going to live here forever, and we kind of make these excuses, or we chalk it up to environmentalism to an extreme. But no, this is a beautiful world that God created. The creativity of God is just incredible. And so why do we respect it? First of all, God made it and is proud of it. You look at the account in Genesis, and in each time at the end of each day, and God said it was good. I mean, this is a beautiful planet, and I love traveling. One of my greatest desires and things that I work at really hard is traveling, and I think I'll talk about that in a session later when I talk about traveling with kids and so on. But number two, or letter B, he placed us as stewards of it. So not only did he make it and he's proud of it, but he said, here, have dominion, be in charge of it. And C, we honor others by taking care of it. I honor others by not throwing my trash on a beach. I honor others by taking the trash with me. I honor others by not dumping my oil in the middle of the street, or disposing of it properly. I honor others by that, because others want to be others want to, or should be allowed to, enjoy this as well. There were times when I've been teaching on this, and I'll put up this sign on the screen, and I'll say, okay, tell me, why should we not litter? And it's meant to be tricky, because often people that see it will say, so you don't get fined. No, that's not the standard that we live by. We don't want to raise our kids to just do things because they're going to get in trouble, or not do things because they're going to get in trouble. But we want them to think of others. I don't litter because someone else will eventually have to clean it up, or it's bad for the environment, or it ruins the scene for other people. You've probably been to places in various cities where it's just really trashed, and the feeling you have is like, it's not a good feeling. And the idea that we respect nature, we don't litter, and it has nothing to do with the fear of getting a fine. We started with this slide, or this verse, in the few sessions ago, when Peter said, respect everyone and love the family of believers, fear God and respect the king. Once again, he was writing that at a time where either Nero or Domitian was the emperor, and both known for persecuting Christians, but yet Peter is saying to respect the king. But let's look at all of it, okay? It says respect everyone. Everyone. We don't get to pick and choose there. It's everyone. And love the family of believers. And sometimes we see tension even in the body of Christ between people that really just don't like each other. And you at least owe each other the respect of being a precious creation of God. Respect everyone. Love the family of believers. Fear God. Of course, we know that as not a be afraid of him, but more of a, if you want to put it in other terms, be afraid of what he thinks, or have a just great and an incredible reverence for him. As we talked about a few sessions ago, when we started this little section on respect and kindness and honor, and respect the king. So there are lots of ways that come up. If we were doing this live, I would just I would really enjoy hearing the ideas that come to your mind of ways to live out otherness in this world and in relationships when it comes to kids playing sports, when it comes to school, church, all of the places we go, to the store, many opportunities for us to be able to display Christ's love in this world. So again, thank you for being part of this series. We're ending a little earlier than usual since I'm wrapping up this section of the series, but we'll be moving on to looking a little closer at obedience, at bribing, and rewarding. We'll look at establishing a family legacy, and inside of that, we'll look at rituals and routines that are very intentional, that speak very loudly to your kids of what it means to be part of this family. We'll also look at consequences, and I want to touch on differences. I did a little bit in the sessions before this, the differences between kids in the family or individuals in the family, but also to look at the differences in personality, their differences in temperament, the differences in even birth order differences are not just a fascinating thing, but there's really a lot to learn from that. And so we'll talk about the differences as well. So we have a lot more ground to cover. So I hope you stay with me and continue journeying through the series of parenting on purpose that the generation to come will know. God bless. See you next week.